thought they knew what they were doing when they climbed the broken fence, badges flashing under the harsh noon sun, stepping heavy and loud onto the patchy grass of the yard. But none of them were prepared for what they found: a thin, silver-muzzled dog, back legs trembling, standing between his home and the world like a frail guardian made of nothing but loyalty and old scars, his cloudy eyes blinking slowly as the officers shouted and waved their arms as if dealing with a wild beast. And though the old dog, named Baxter, barely had the strength to bark, he still growled low and steady, not from fear, but from the deep-rooted instinct to protect the place where his memories lived, the place he had once ruled as a young, fearless pup when the yard was greener and the world kinder. And as the officers grew more impatient, pulling batons from their belts and inching closer, neighbors gathered at their windows, phones filming behind trembling curtains, watching a scene unfold that felt wrong in ways they couldn't yet name. And it wasn't until a battered blue pickup truck screeched to a halt in the driveway, door flying open to reveal a wiry old man with eyes sharp as flint, that everything shifted, because the man, Harold, Baxter's lifelong companion, didn't hesitate, didn't shout or plead. He simply whistled a single low, sweet note, and the dog, upon hearing that sound, his sound, immediately forgot fear, forgot pain, and stumbled across the yard as fast as his old bones would carry him, collapsing into Harold's arms with a sigh so deep it seemed to empty the air itself. And the officers froze, unsure now of their righteousness, and Harold, without anger, but with a terrible sadness lining every word, told them what they had never thought to ask, that Baxter was no stray, no threat, but a decorated search and rescue dog, a hero who had pulled bodies from earthquake rubble and found lost children in the woods when hope was a dying ember. A dog who had once stood in the rain for hours over the broken body of a little boy until help came, refusing to leave even when ordered. And as Harold spoke, his voice trembling not from fear, but from the weight of too many memories, the officers' faces changed, some hardening into defensiveness, others softening into shame, and slowly, awkwardly, they backed away, trying to justify their actions with mumbled excuses about regulations and complaints. But Harold wasn't listening anymore. His world narrowed to the labored breaths of the dog, who had never once given up on him. Not through war, not through the slow death of Harold's wife, not through the long, lonely years that followed. And the neighbors began to step outside now, guilt and anger pushing them into the open, surrounding the scene not with hostility, but with a rising, undeniable truth that sometimes the smallest lives hold the greatest stories. And as Harold gently lifted Baxter into the truck, wrapping him in the old army blanket that had once belonged to his son, he turned once to face the gathering crowd and said simply, "He deserves better than this," and drove away without waiting for permission or apology, the truck coughing and rattling down the road toward a place where loyalty still meant something. And though the story might have ended there, whispered in local gossip, or buried under outrage, it didn't, because a young journalist named Emily, who had watched the whole thing unfold from her second-story window, posted the video online that night with a caption that read, "Not all heroes wear badges." And by morning, it had been shared 1,000,000 times, sparking a firestorm of outrage, sorrow, and remembrance across the country. And suddenly, people wanted to know everything about Baxter. The missions he had run, the lives he had saved, the years he had given without asking for anything but a quiet place to sleep at the end of each day. And within days, donations poured in to fix Harold's broken fence, to pay for Baxter's veterinary care, to lift the old man and his dog out of the weary poverty they had long accepted as fate. And something even rarer happened too, something quieter but stronger. Conversations, real conversations, about respect, about assumptions, about the silent worth of those we overlook, because they no longer look the way heroes are supposed to look. And when the mayor himself showed up at Harold's door a week later, a plaque in hand and television crews swarming the lawn, Harold almost slammed the door in his face, but Baxter, wagging his frail tail and pressing his graying muzzle against Harold's leg, seemed to say, "Let them try." And so Harold opened the door, accepted the apology, and agreed to attend a small ceremony held not in some sterile government building, but right there in the newly replanted backyard, where Baxter had once stood alone against the world, and under a sky brushed with the soft gold of an early evening, surrounded by neighbors who had finally remembered what community meant. Harold knelt beside Baxter as the mayor read the proclamation declaring the yard an honorary sanctuary for service animals. And when the crowd erupted in applause, Harold whispered in Baxter's ear that none of it mattered half as much as the way the dog's tail thumped against the earth, steady and sure. And though Baxter passed quietly in his sleep not long after, his muzzle resting against Harold's worn boot, he left behind a legacy, stitched not with medals or ceremonies, but with the invisible, indelible threads of loyalty, courage, and love, threads that wove through the hearts of all who had witnessed the moment when an old dog reminded the world what true heroism looks like. And in the years that followed, Harold, though heartbroken, never truly walked alone, because somehow, someway, Baxter's spirit lingered in the little sanctuary they had built together. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed across the yard and the wind carried the scent of new beginnings, Harold would sit in his creaky rocking chair, his hand resting on the empty spot where Baxter once lay, and he would smile, knowing that somewhere just beyond sight, under the seasons turned, as they always do. And though Harold's hair grew thinner and his steps slower, his days were full in ways he never expected at his age. Because, after Baxter's passing, the little backyard sanctuary became more than a local curiosity. It became a living, breathing place of healing, a refuge not just for old dogs who had given their lives in service, but for wounded hearts too. And people came from across the county, and soon across the state, bringing with them dogs with cloudy eyes and gray whiskers, dogs who had seen the worst and given their best, soldiers with unseen wounds, children carrying invisible scars, and Harold, gruff as ever, but with a gentleness that seemed carved into his very bones, welcomed them all, not with grand speeches or hollow promises, but with a simple nod and the kind of silence that said, "You're safe here." And in time, the sanctuary grew beyond the small fence line that had once seemed a prison, and now seemed a sacred border. Neighbors donating land, volunteers building out new shaded runs, warm kennels, a little veterinary shed, funded by the donations of those who believed in second chances. And all of it stitched together by a community that had once watched silently from behind curtains, but now stood shoulder to shoulder, hands calloused, hearts open. And Harold, though he missed Baxter with an ache that never fully dulled, found a kind of purpose he hadn't tasted since the long-ago days of search and rescue missions, when every hour might mean life or death, when every bark and every tug of the leash mattered. And the old man, who had once thought his life was winding down to a quiet, lonely end, instead woke each day to a chorus of grateful howls and wagging tails, to the bright eyes of those who still believed, against all odds, that there was good in the world worth fighting for. And as word of the sanctuary spread, not in flashy headlines, but through whispered stories passed from one grateful soul to another, more began to arrive. An aging German shepherd who had worked narcotics busts for a decade and still perked up at the scent of trouble. A limping golden retriever who had pulled survivors from a flooded nursing home during a hurricane. A one-eyed husky who had once guided lost hikers down treacherous mountain trails. And each dog, though battered and worn, carried themselves with a quiet dignity that moved even the hardest hearts, reminding everyone who crossed the threshold that heroism doesn't fade with youth. It deepens. It roots itself in the soul. And Harold, who learned the names and stories of every dog that found its way to him, often sat on his porch long after sunset, the air thick with the scent of pine and wildflowers, telling the stars about Baxter, about how none of this would have happened if not for a battered blue pickup, a broken fence, and an old dog who refused to be forgotten. And sometimes, when the wind stirred just right, he swore he could hear Baxter's tail thumping against the earth again, steady and sure as it had been that day when everything changed, and life, in its stubborn, beautiful way, continued to weave more stories into the sanctuary's growing legend, like the young boy named Eli who came one summer, silent and broken after losing his parents in a fire, and who found his voice again whispering secrets into the thick fur of a retired firehouse Dalmatian named Scout. or the widowed woman who visited every Sunday to sit beside a deaf collie named Penny, both finding comfort in the simple act of presence, needing no words to heal wounds deeper than language, or the grizzled former soldier who drove 3 hours every week just to walk the perimeter with an ancient bloodhound named Gus, both veterans in their own right, both needing the company of someone who understood that sometimes surviving is its own kind of bravery. And through all of it, Harold remained the quiet heartbeat of the place, stubbornly refusing interviews and awards, turning away those who wanted to make the sanctuary into something glossy and marketable, because he knew, better than anyone, that its magic wasn't in its story. It was in its soul, in the way it held space for grief and joy alike, in the way it honored the old, the broken, the forgotten, not as burdens, but as living testaments to what love and loyalty could endure. And it wasn't until the 5th spring after Baxter's passing that something happened that Harold could never have predicted. One misty morning, as he moved through the yard with his mug of black coffee steaming in the chill air, a shape appeared at the broken edge of the forest line. A young girl, no more than 9 or 10, her clothes torn, her hair matted, a wild look in her eyes that spoke of too many nights spent running from something. And before Harold could move or call out, a massive white wolf dog stepped from the trees behind her, ribs showing through its coat, but head held high, protective, wary, and Harold froze, not in fear, but in awe, because somehow he knew deep in his gut, the way you know a storm is coming, that this was no ordinary meeting. And he knelt, setting his mug aside, and called out, not to the girl, not to the wolf dog, but to the space between them, to the fragile thread that still held them both in the world, saying, "You're safe here, if you want to be." And for a long moment, nothing moved, not the trees, not the air. And then slowly, inch by careful inch, the girl approached, the wolf dog never leaving her side. And when she finally reached Harold's outstretched hand, she didn't speak, just pressed her palm to his. A silent plea for a kind of safety words couldn't promise, and Harold nodded, understanding more in that moment than 1,000 speeches could have said. And without asking questions, without prying or demanding explanations, he led them both through the gate and into the sanctuary, where the dogs, who understood trauma better than any human ever could, rose and wagged and sniffed and made space, welcoming her into the pack without judgment or fear. And in time, her name came to light, Lily, and her story, a tangled mess of foster homes and broken promises, and a final desperate flight into the woods. But none of that mattered more than the bond she formed with the wolf dog she called Ghost, a bond that echoed the one Harold had once shared with Baxter, pure and fierce and unbreakable. And under Harold's quiet guidance, Lily found her footing, learned to trust the slow, patient rhythm of life at the sanctuary, and little by little, the haunted look faded from her eyes, replaced by something steadier, something stronger, And Harold, though he never said it aloud, knew that she, like so many of the dogs who came through their gates, had been a rescue worth every hardship, every scar. And as the years wore on, and Harold's body began to betray him more and more often, it was Lily who took up the mantle he had never thought to pass, building new kennels, starting training programs for therapy dogs, teaching visitors not just how to pet and praise, but how to truly see the souls standing before them on 4 battered paws. And when Harold finally passed one soft autumn morning, sitting on the porch with Ghost's great head resting in his lap, and Lily curled in a blanket at his side, it was not with fear or regret, but with a heart so full it seemed to hum with the weight of 100 lifetimes. And though the sanctuary mourned, it did not crumble, because Harold had built something stronger than stone or steel. He had built a living legacy, a place stitched from love and stubbornness, and the belief that every soul, no matter how battered or broken, deserved a place to belong. And in the years that followed, the sanctuary grew into something almost mythic, whispered about in dog parks and shelters and late-night campfires, as the place where old heroes found peace, where lost children found hope, where the broken found the courage to heal. And at the center of it all stood Lily, no longer the wild-eyed child, but a fierce, kind leader, her hair streaked with gray, her voice steady and sure, and beside her always Ghost, aging but proud, a reminder that even the wildest hearts can find home when offered with patience and grace. And some nights, when the moon hung low and the wind carried the scent of pine and possibility, Lily would sit on the porch Harold had built with his own calloused hands, her gaze drifting over the sleeping forms of dogs and people alike. And she would whisper a thank you to the stars, to a silver-muzzled dog named Baxter, to a gruff old man who believed that sometimes the most broken things are the most worth saving. And in those moments, she knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that Harold's dream hadn't died with him. It had only just begun, growing and spreading like wildflowers across the weary world, a living testament to the truth that love, loyalty, and a stubborn, aching hope could change everything. Years slipped by like quiet river currents under a heavy summer moon, and the sanctuary became not just a refuge, but a beacon, a place whispered about across towns, cities, and even borders, as if the soul of Harold and Baxter had spread on the winds themselves, drawing in those whose lives had cracked under the weight of the world, those whose scars, seen and unseen, found healing only in the patience of a dog's steady gaze, or the protective circle of a loyal pack. And Lily, who had once stumbled through the gates wild and afraid, grew into a woman of quiet power, her leadership born not from ambition, but from a deep, aching understanding of pain and love, interwoven like the roots of ancient trees. And under her guidance, the sanctuary blossomed into something Harold could have scarcely imagined, but surely would have recognized: sprawling meadows alive with the laughter of children learning trust, anew beside battered shepherds and retrievers, forest trails where wounded veterans found strength again, walking side by side with wolf dogs and hounds, tiny, cozy cottages where the elderly could spend their last years surrounded by unconditional love instead of loneliness. And over it all presided the old farmhouse, still humble, still creaking under the weight of time, but stronger than steel in its spirit. Its porch now worn smooth by 1,000 nights of storytelling, of remembering, of building something unbreakable from the broken pieces the world had cast aside. And though Lily carried the daily burdens of bills, repairs, new arrivals, and the endless tide of needs that came with so many souls seeking shelter, she never once faltered in her devotion to the dream Harold had planted like a stubborn seed in rough soil. A seed that had grown into a towering, living tree under the shared watch of those who believed that hope was not foolish, but vital. And as the sanctuary's fame grew, so too did its challenges. Offers came from corporations wanting to expand the brand, journalists hungry for exclusive rights, politicians eager to claim the place as a token of goodwill. But Lily stood firm, remembering Harold's steady hand on her shoulder, Ghost's massive form at her side, Baxter's legend woven into every fence post and flower bed, and she refused to let greed or pride poison what had been born from the purest act of kindness. And though she accepted help, donations from good-hearted strangers, partnerships with ethical trainers and veterinarians, she never sold the sanctuary's soul, always returning to the simple truth that had saved her, that sometimes all anyone needs is a safe place to stand and a heart willing to listen. And amid the whirlwind of growth and challenge, Lily found her own family not through blood, but through bond, adopting a boy named Micah, who had arrived silent and furious after losing his parents to the slow cruelty of addiction. A boy who, much like Lily herself had once done, found his voice not through therapy sessions or medication, but through the patient companionship of an old, three-legged beagle named Homer. And together, Lily and Micah tended the sanctuary, building new paths, starting educational programs that taught compassion and patience to a new generation, ensuring that the roots of Harold's dream ran deep and wide enough to withstand the storms of time. And it was during one particularly cold winter evening, with the snow piled high against the fences and the stars burning fierce and low, that Lily, now gray at the temples, but strong in the way mountains are strong, sat by the hearth with Micah at her feet, a pack of elderly dogs snoring gently around them, and decided it was time to tell the whole story, the real story, the one that had begun with a broken fence, an old dog named Baxter, and a man whose love had changed the world without him ever trying to. And as she spoke, her voice slow and deliberate, the fire casting flickering shadows that made the old walls seem alive, Micah listened with wide eyes, absorbing every word as if it were air itself. And when she finished, he sat silent for a long time before asking the question she had known would come. Will it ever end? And Lily, feeling the weight of years press against her heart like a hand made of memory and hope, smiled and shook her head, replying, "Not if we remember." And it was in that moment that Lily truly knew, that the sanctuary was no longer just a place, but a legacy, a living, breathing testament to the stubborn, infinite power of love. And even after she was gone, even after Micah grew and carried the torch into generations she would never see, the sanctuary would stand, not because of buildings or money, but because of the story stitched into its very earth, a story that began with a harassed old dog in a crumbling backyard and had blossomed into a refuge that stretched its arms wide enough to hold all who needed it. And so time rolled forward, as time does, and while the faces changed, while new dogs limped or bounded through the gates, and new hands built and mended and loved, the spirit remained unbreakable, a bright burning thread weaving through the lives of all who touched it. And sometimes, in the soft velvet of twilight, when the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and pine, those who lived at the sanctuary, the caretakers, the children, the wounded, the healed, swore they could see them, an old man in a battered coat, a silver-muzzled dog by his side, standing at the edge of the forest, watching, smiling, tail wagging slow and steady. And they would know without words that they were not alone, that they had never been alone, and that somewhere, just beyond the veil of sight, Harold and Baxter, and all the souls who had come before, still stood watch over the place where the forgotten were remembered, where the broken were made whole, where the simple, stubborn act of love had proven powerful enough to shape 1,000 futures. And the sanctuary endured, not because of luck or miracle, but because it had been built on the only foundation that could ever truly last: loyalty, sacrifice, hope, and the unshakable bond between those who know, deep in their marrow, that sometimes the smallest kindness can spark the greatest change. And so the sanctuary thrived, rooted in the heartbeat of a dream whispered under the first light of the moon, carried forward in every paw print left in the dust, in every hand reaching out to comfort a trembling soul, in every breath that drew in the cold night air and exhaled gratitude into the wide, forgiving sky. And though the names would fade into history, though the faces would blur across time's relentless canvas, the story would never end. Because in every corner of the world where someone knelt beside a trembling dog, whispered a promise of safety into a tattered ear, or stood between a soul and the darkness threatening to swallow it, the spirit of the sanctuary, of Harold, of Baxter, of Lily, of all who had ever believed in the redemptive power of love, would live on, a fire burning bright against the endless night, reminding the world that no one, not man, not child, not dog, is ever truly lost as long as someone remembers to light the way home.